I'm David Zuckerman, Lieutenant Governor of Vermont, and I'm running to be Governor of Vermont. Well, I think the governor's done a generally good job. One place that I think we need to go further, faster is mandatory masks in all indoor facilities and also in public events that have a fair number of people. It's clear by the science that that is the fastest way we're going to keep this from spreading, whether it's by tourists coming in or students that are returning to school. We need to make sure we do lots of temperature testing when people go to events, and we need everybody to be wearing masks. The faster we suppress this and have leadership in our state working across the country to suppress this, the faster we can return to a more normal life from a health perspective, which is most important, and also from an economic perspective. Well, there's a number of things about the economic recovery. The first is to make sure we stay healthy. And we have to do masks to do that. We should be taking temperatures as we do at the State House of everybody entering the building. It's clear that that is a big indicator of potential spikes. And then we need to be investing in Vermont. The current governor has looked towards an austerity budget saying, we just don't have the money. Well, as governor, two things can happen. One, as a Republican, he could lead the charge with other Republican governors to push Congress to pass supplemental funding for state and municipal budgets. So we don't have to make drastic cuts to our education and human service budgets, which are not only bad for the impacts of those on Vermonters, but also means cutting thousands of jobs, which means not circulating money in the economy. The second part would be to look towards the Trump tax cuts and look at a temporary marginal tax to sequester some of that on the most wealthy Vermonters, the top 5%, to invest in our economic infrastructure so we can actually jumpstart our economy. Well, there's a number of issues around food insecurity. One is minimum wage. Those who are earning money need to be earning more money so that they can support their families. Two is the recent addition of $5 million of CARES Act funding to go to restaurants to put people back to work and making meals for hungry Vermonters. At $5 million, we're going to produce over 18,000 meals a week all across Vermont through the end of December. I suspect that's going to have to continue longer. We also have to look at SNAP benefits and look at whether we can increase those to, again, make sure Vermonters have the resources they need to feed their families and use those resources in the local stores, in the local economy, which again is part of building our economy. So it's about food insecurity is about money shortage. It's also about jobs and rebuilding jobs, which you can do through both CARES Act money as well as a Green New Deal, as I said earlier, to sequester the Trump tax cuts and use some of that money to invest in Vermont and create good paying jobs. Climate change is one of the biggest reasons I'm running. It is an issue for our rural economy. It's an issue for our state as a whole, from tourism to the maple industry, from agriculture to outdoor recreation and skiing. If we don't tackle the climate crisis head on, Vermont's economy in the next 20 and 30 years is going to get flipped on its head. We need to not only invest in the climate economy for the future, but also for the present. We can put thousands of Vermonters to work installing solar panels on working Vermonters' homes and seniors' homes. We can put people to work weatherizing those same homes so that working Vermonters have lower bills. We want to talk about affordability. Let's lower Vermonters' bills. We could also use money investing in broadband and affordable housing in our village centers. By expanding affordable housing and building out broadband, we actually can reduce the climate impact by reducing commuting, and we can improve our economy by attracting and retaining Vermonters to live and work in Vermont with remote jobs down to the New York and Boston areas, bringing dollars here without having to travel. There's a lot of opportunity in addressing the climate crisis for economic development in Vermont. Systemic racism is a huge issue across Vermont and in this country. It has been built over 400 years of white supremacy. And while current Vermonters sometimes don't feel that they're part of the problem, we have to look at how our system still embodies this. We embody it in over-incarceration of our BIPOC communities, way disproportionate to our population and disproportionate to the crimes that are committed. We have issues of detention and suspension in our schools that are way above average because sometimes kids who wear their hair differently or wear a hoodie are then punished. And that's part of our internal biases that we need to address. We have systemic racism in our lending and suspicion or lack of capital for our BIPOC communities and our new American communities to start jobs and businesses that would employ people. There are many, many facets. Systemic racism means it's across all aspects of our society, and we need to be looking at it across all aspects. And Vermont needs to employ more communities of color in the administration so that policies are made with BIPOC mindset and implicit biases in mind. And we also have to do this work across all state agencies to review our internal biases and what the policies are to improve the situation going forward. Well, the legislature started well with S219 and other pieces in reforming both the use of force policies in Vermont and also the training council, which up to now has only been law enforcement. And we've expanded it to include mental health providers, domestic violence support individuals, members of the community of color, and then 3 appointees by the governor not associated with law enforcement, so that our law enforcement training itself gets reformed to move away from the current national average of 60 hours of firearms training and 4 hours of community to a more balanced approach with trainings around de-escalation and bringing in people other than law enforcement, as we've done in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, to sometimes de-escalate situations where a person in law enforcement with a gun may not be the best person to address the situation that they're approaching. And if we can just de-escalate more situations before we start putting them into the system, the better. We also need to look at parole violations and make sure we don't put people back in prison for minor parole violations. We have to get rid of cash bail. If you look at the COVID crisis, 200 people were let out of prison for public health. Clearly, we don't need to have as many people incarcerated in order to improve public safety. When I started my campaign, one of the big issues was our rural economy, and a big backbone piece of that is expanding rural broadband. By sequestering some of the Trump tax cuts to the wealthiest 5% of Vermonters, we could put as much as $20 million a year for the next 3 to 5 years into expanding broadband and using that money to seed our community utility districts in order to take advantage of federal match money as well as private investment in broadband. If we were to do that, we would go a long way towards amassing the $300 million that it's going to take to get broadband truly distributed all across the state. Once we have that broadband, the opportunity to reduce commuting, to include telecommuting, to keep Vermonters here with good paying jobs, to attract out-of-state folks, which I'm hearing are already looking to move here, buying properties sight unseen from the urban areas in order to protect themselves from the COVID crisis. We have a unique opportunity to really take advantage of that in ways that other rural communities in far western and midwestern parts of the country don't have. So expanding broadband is critical, and we need to use resources to invest in this for Vermont's future. Well, first, to make Vermont more attractive, we need to make sure everybody is welcome here. Those who are born here, those who are indigenous to this community, and those who want to move here. It's hard to be attractive when people don't feel welcome. And we need to make sure to include all of those voices in the conversation moving forward about making Vermont attractive for Vermonters and others to move here. The second piece has to do with economics. We need to have affordable housing. We need childcare and early child education. And we need to really tout and talk about what our amazing public school system is throughout Vermont. We have great public schools, particularly compared to other rural parts of the country. And if we have the opportunity of safe communities, affordable housing, childcare, and good broadband and a welcoming atmosphere, Vermont has a real bright future. And I'm looking forward to leading Vermont into that future by bringing folks into these conversations so that we make sure our policies reflect our goals.